The first service that is going to be very important for us to deploy a global application is Amazon Route 53. So Route 53 is a managed DNS or domain name system. And what is a DNS? Well, a DNS is just like a phone book. It's a collection of rules and records which help clients find the right servers through URLs. So let's go through the most common records in AWS. For example, say you are mapping www.google.com to an IPv4 address, then this is called an A record. If you are mapping www.google.com to a long IPv6 address, it's called a quadruple A record. Also, if you map a hostname to another hostname, so search.google.com into the previous address, it's called a CNAME because we're mapping a hostname to a hostname. And then finally, if you're mapping a hostname into an AWS resource, it's a special type of record called an alias record. And that works for you if you have an ELB, or if you're using CloudFront, Amazon S3, an RDS database, etc., etc. Now, going into the exam, you don't need to know all the types of records, but I just wanted to give you an overview of them in this lecture. So from an exam perspective, Route 53 is a managed DNS. But let's go one step further because you need to understand a little bit better how it works. So for example, for Route 53, say we want to see what happens for an A record. So a web browser is here, that's a web browser, and we have an application server that we've deployed that has a public IPv4. Now we want to be able to access our application server using a normal URL. So for this, we're going to go into Route 53 and we're going to create a record. And so that when the web browser does a DNS request for myapp.mydomain.com, then the DNS will reply back with an IP. And then that IP can be used by our web browser to get to our correct server and then get the HTTP response from our server. And this is the basics of how a DNS works at a very, very high level. What you need to understand as well for Route 53 from an exam perspective is routing policies. So we need to know them at a high level and decide what's the right one based on the use case. But as you'll see, it's pretty simple. So the first one is called a simple routing policy, which has no health checks. So our web browser will go into our DNS system, does a DNS query, and gets an IPv4, for example, as a result. That's a simple routing policy, the basic one we can understand. The weighted routing policy allows us to distribute the traffic across multiple EC2 instances. So in this example, we have to assign weights to our EC2 instances, for example, 70, 20, and 10. And then our DNS will make sure that our clients have 70% of the traffic onto the first one, 20% of the traffic onto the second one, and 10% of the traffic onto the third one. This is effectively some kind of load balancing. So in this weighted routing policy, we can use health checks. Next, we have the latency routing policy. So in this example, say we are deploying our application globally, one in California and the other one in Australia, and our users are all around the world. The latency routing policy will look at where the user is located, and if they're located close to our America EC2 instance, then they will be redirected to talk to that server. And if they're close to Australia, then they will be redirected to talk to the Australia server. And this is based on the latency. So in this example, Route 53 will be used to minimize the latency between the users and the servers by making the users connect to the server that is the closest to them. And then finally, we have a failover routing policy in which we have a client and we have a primary EC2 instance and a failover one. And so our DNS system will do a health check on the primary. And in case the primary instance fails, then we will be redirected to the failovers. This helps with disaster recovery. So the client will know exactly, thanks to Route 53, which instance to connect to based on the health of that instance. So that's it. Those are the 4 routing policies you need to know. Just the first one does not have a health check. All the other ones have health checks, and they all serve different purposes. So weighted routing policy is to distribute the traffic across multiple EC2 instances. Latency is to minimize latency, and failover is to help with disaster recovery. So I hope that was helpful, and I will see you in the next lecture.